Welcome to worship with us here at New Market Christian Church. My name is Patrick Lando. I'm the pastor here. Thank you for joining us online. We have two things coming up this week. On Wednesday is our next World Travelers. That's our opportunity to meet with missionaries and others who have lived abroad, who are going to come and share their story. So this month, I believe, is Ecuador. This Wednesday at 6 o'clock, we'll have a presentation by our missionaries, and then we'll have food afterwards. There's also activities for the kids to do. It's a really wonderful time. And so please come out and join us this Wednesday at 6 o'clock. That's for all ages, kids, teenagers, parents, grandparents, single people, everybody. Come on out. It's a wonderful time. We've had a wonderful time the past couple times. I look forward to seeing you there. And then the next day, Thursday in the afternoon, is our Community Food Network time of the month. Once a month, the third Thursday of the month, we go and volunteer with the Community Food Network. So if you want to do that, please sign up for that as well. That is also this week. We also are collecting spices to give to the food pantry. And so if you have some spices you would like to donate to that, that would be wonderful as well. Today we are continuing our journey through Nehemiah as he finally arrives in Jerusalem to repair the city. And we're going to look at how his story might give advice to our graduates, as today we are celebrating our high school graduates as well as our kindergarten graduates and people who are graduating from other things. And so join us for that if you are able, and certainly for the message later on as we talk about our graduates. But before all that, let's begin with communion. The Apostle Paul tells us that he was taught that on the night that Jesus was betrayed, as he was sitting around the table with his disciples, he took bread and he broke it and said that this bread represents my body, which is broken for you all. Every time that you eat this bread, do it remembering what I have done. Then after the meal, he took a cup and said, this cup is the covenant in my blood. As often as you drink it remembering all that I have done for you. And so when we eat the bread and drink the cup, we share in communion with each other and with God, with the Christians around the world, to remember that Christ died for us and rose from the dead that we may experience new life. Let us continue in worship. Our scripture comes to us today from Nehemiah chapter 2, starting in verse 11. So I came to Jerusalem, was there for 3 days. Then I got up during the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. The only animal I took was the animal I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate, past the dragon's spring, and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that had been broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the animal I was riding to continue. So I went up by way of the valley by night and inspected the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate and so returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest that were to do the work. Then I said to them, you see the troubles we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we may no longer suffer disgrace. I told them that the hand of my God had been gracious upon me, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. Then they said, let us start building. So they committed themselves to the common good. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they mocked and ridiculed us, saying, what is this that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? Then I replied to them, the God of heaven is the one who will give us success, and we, his servants, are going to start building, but you have no share or claim or historic right in Jerusalem. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Today we are celebrating our graduates. Our high school graduates, of course, are kind of foremost on our mind, but also our kindergarten and college and other people graduating. And as I've been reflecting on graduations myself, I kind of was tickled by the reality that when I graduated college, I graduated with a music composition degree, knowing full well that I never planned to be able to make a living off of writing music. Now, it might sound a little crazy to get a degree in something that you don't plan on using to make a living, but some of it was just kind of the atmosphere that I was in at the college, where it just over and over again in subtle ways and sometimes blunt ways, it was communicated that like writing music is not easy to get an income from. It's really difficult. That if you want to be a composer, you really need to either go get kind of graduate degrees and then become a teacher or professor, or lead a group or something, and then you can also write on the side, or you need some sort of day job. And then eventually, maybe when you're in your 50s or 60s, then you can live off of the work that you've created, the work that you've written. It was very much like a pessimistic, this is not something that is possible. And it makes me wonder, for our high school graduates and for all of us though, like what else do we feel might be impossible? Now, I didn't pursue the music degree, the music career, because in hindsight, like I really was feeling called to the ministry, to being a pastor. And I have just taken kind of a slow, circuitous route to get there. But like, it does make me wonder what might have been different if I had really pursued that. And what are the things that we have chosen not to pursue, or as for our young people that you're afraid to pursue because it just seems impossible? And what do we do when things seem impossible, especially when it's something that really matters? When it's like, this is important, but it just seems impossible. Because that is really what Nehemiah is approaching in our story today. We've been going through the book of Nehemiah this month as we're exploring, kind of hopefully getting back to normal. What was it like for Nehemiah to rebuild his hometown of Jerusalem? If you follow the story so far, you know that God's people created a kingdom, and that eventually the Babylonians come in, conquer the kingdom, destroy the capital city of Jerusalem and God's temple that was in Jerusalem. Obviously, this was heartbreaking and disorienting for the people of Israel, who are living in Babylon. But 50, 60 years later, the Persians come in and kick out the Babylonians and allow the people to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild. And so Nehemiah becomes the leader of this rebuilding effort. 2 weeks ago, we talked about how he learned about the state of Jerusalem, how he wept and then prayed to God, how his first step was to go to God, seeking that God would help him rebuild the city. Last week, we talked about how he worked behind the scenes to get the permission from the king to be able to rebuild Jerusalem, as well as getting resources necessary to do it. Just like, last week being Mother's Day, just like our mothers often do a lot of work behind the scenes that goes unrecognized, that allows us to have the lives that we have. And so today, Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem, and how does he approach this task? To rebuild a city sounds hard. It sounds difficult. To me, it would probably feel impossible. How does he approach this task that seems like it might be impossible? Well, the first thing he does is he doesn't just run around shouting to everybody what he's going to do. He takes 3 days to really get an understanding of the city and what's going on. He goes out at night to try and get a glimpse of the state of the walls and the gates, where people aren't going to see him. People aren't going to notice what he's doing or what his plan is. And I think that's so important. I think if I were to go back and kind of pursue a music career, one of the things I would do would be to get that lay of the land. I didn't really have a good sense of the music industry. I still don't have a good sense of the music industry, really, because it just wasn't something I was really going to pursue. But things aren't really as impossible as they seem, because someone is writing church music. Someone's writing music for movies. Someone's writing music for TV and commercials. And like, people are out there writing music. So like, if I wanted to write music, Like there are people I could try and get connected to or try and learn from and get a lay of how does this work? How do people make this work? It may be really difficult, but certainly not impossible. And that's what Nehemiah is doing. He's getting a lay of like, yeah, this is going to be difficult, but it's not going to be impossible. He doesn't want to go in blind, though. He's not just going to go in confidence and bravado without a plan. He gets a good assessment of the situation. The second thing is that's mentioned there that's, I think, key is that he has a few trusted men with him, and he doesn't tell everybody else. And I think this is important because people are willing at a drop of a hat to tell you just how impossible something is. I don't know why. I don't know why it is. I don't know if you've ever tried to like do something new before, whether it's in church or even with family members or whatever, but like you're like, oh, well, we haven't done it that way before. Or I mean, oh, well, that sounds good, but I don't think that's going to work. People can be so negative and so Eeyore about everything that, especially when things are starting and you're forming a plan, you want people who are going to be both encouraging and honest, who are going to be like, yeah, you can do this. This is going to be great, but it's like also you really need to make sure you work through these issues, or have you thought about this, or have you worked through this? You need those people who are trusted advisors and encouragers. Not one or the other, but like both, who are willing to give the criticism and feedback you need to do the best that you can, but also to be that kind of encouraging voice to help keep you going, especially when so many people seem just to really want to tell you how impossible things are. Third is that he launches his plan strategically. He doesn't just kind of say, hey, we're going to do this now. He has this little speech that he gives after he gets a good lay of the land, after he's talked with some of his closest advisors. He gathers together all of the people that he's going to need to rebuild the city and talks to them. Okay, here's the plan. I've got the support of the king. I've got resources. God has been with me to get all of these resources. It's going to work. And the people are excited. The people are thrilled. Like, oh, he's planned this out. He's got everything in motion. This is going to be great. And people join in. And I think so often in church ministry especially, like we have great ideas. Ideas happen all the time that are fantastic. But we don't always plan and we don't always follow through on the plan. I've led events and put together events where there have been like 2 people there versus like 50 people there. And one of those that had a bunch of people there, probably 50 people there, was this like middle school lock-in that I did with churches that were close to the one that I was working at years ago. And I had spent months leading up to it, meeting once a month with 4 or 5 other youth pastors to talk through, okay, we want to do something together to connect with our youth because we all have youth groups, but they're all a little small. It's hard to do anything with just ourselves. So the 4 or 5 of us combined, we could have a really good event. We could really connect with our kids. Maybe they'll bring friends. And so we did. We planned this whole overnight lock-in thing. It went really, really well. We had like 40, 50 kids when none of us had 40, 50 kids. It was really an amazing time. But it didn't just happen. It happened because we put a bunch of work in things. And oftentimes, one of the things we don't want to have to admit is that sometimes when things fail, it's not because it was a bad idea. It's not because God didn't want it to happen. It's because sometimes we didn't put in enough work. Now, maybe we worked hard, but sometimes it's not enough. Or maybe we put in a lot of work, but just in the wrong area. We put all this work building a program, but we never recruited anyone. Or we got all of these people to show up, but then we didn't put in the work to make sure that the event went well, and so it kind of went okay. And so some people keep coming back, but like not great, right? Nehemiah is deliberate, strategic, has a plan, and follows that plan. And it makes me wonder sometimes, are we willing to do the kind of self-reflection and hard work it takes in order to make something that is impossible happen? The last thing that I think is interesting about this passage is that it returns to these guys that were at the last part of the story last week who are opposing Nehemiah. Because the harsh reality is that most things that we attempt in life, someone or something will oppose us. I don't know why. It just is reality. There is opposition all of the time. I started the year talking about kind of the work of Mike Mather, who really kind of had this different shift in how he approached ministry. And I was listening to him do an interview about his shift in ministry. And the person interviewing was like, well, was it hard to kind of get the church to be on board with this different approach? And he's like, well, everything I've ever done in church has always had pushback. There's always been pushback. It doesn't matter what I do or what I decide or what I lead or what anybody on the church board does. There's always pushback. And so the question is, when you face that opposition, are you doing something you believe in, or are you doing something you feel like you have to do because that's what you're supposed to be doing? Or are you doing just, oh, this is kind of the thing that I think I can do because I think it'll be fine. I think it'll be successful. And I think sometimes that's the challenge, is that maybe we want to pursue the thing that's the path of least resistance, where we're not going to receive any pushback. Or maybe we get started on something and then we start to hear people being like, oh no, I don't think that's a good thing. Well, sometimes it's because people don't know. Sometimes it's because people are in opposition. But that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do, and it doesn't mean it's the thing that you should do or shouldn't do. In fact, if you are following God, if you are stepping out in faith to do what God is calling you to do, you will experience opposition. You will face hardship. You will face obstacles. You can't live a life for God and not have someone or something step in the way to try and get you off track. It's just part of what happens. And I think what's interesting here, you see Nehemiah, what is the complaint that his opposition brings? It's like, oh, are you rebelling against the king by building these walls around Jerusalem? Nehemiah knew that the first opposition he was going to face is that he was rebelling against the king by rebuilding Jerusalem. He already got permission from the king. That's the first thing that he did after praying to God, was to get permission from the king so that he didn't look like a rebel, and then to go to all of the officials in the region with a letter from the king to let them know, hey, I've got permission from the king, because he knew someone was going to get up and say something. And I know that as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little bit better at recognizing, oh, this is where people are going to have a problem with this, or this is where there's going to be pushback, or this is where there's going to be opposition. And some of that just kind of is experience, and I'm learning more as I continue to grow. But we shouldn't let that kind of opposition prevent us from doing what we are passionate about, from doing what God is calling us to do. And so to our graduates, you're at this fun, exciting time where you have your whole life in front of you. And maybe what you decide to do in the next 4 years will be what you do with most of the rest of your life. Or maybe you'll do that for a few years and realize, you know what? This is not for me. I'm going to go down this road. And that's fine. This is your time to go and explore, to try and figure out what is it that God has created you to do in this world. And I want you to feel the possibilities, because I think in our world right now, things can feel impossible. There's war in Ukraine. We're still dealing with a pandemic that doesn't seem like it's ever going to really wrap up. We've dealt with disruption in our lives. We've dealt with the loss of friends and family members. It can feel like a very impossible time. But God is still the same. God worked through hard times throughout Nehemiah's life. God has worked through hard times in our country before, and God will work through us now to see things that feel impossible become possible. And to the rest of us, those of us not graduating and going on to the next thing, for those of us who are where we are for the foreseeable future, what feels impossible? What are you putting off? What are you hesitating about? And what would it take to do the work, to do whatever it is that God might be putting on your heart? To look at the situation, to get a lay of the land, to bring around trusted advisors, to develop a plan and launch that plan, and to be prepared and steadfast in the face of opposition. Because what I do believe is that God has created all of us for a purpose. God has created each and every one of us to do good in this world, to do something unique, whether it be just to change the lives of the people around us, or to change our community or our world. I know that God has created you for a purpose. And while that may feel impossible, let me tell you it's not. I hope today, as we celebrate our graduates, that you can feel not just the possibilities that they have for their life, but the possibilities for you and your life to live abundant and free in the love of God.